Welcome to this session on effective user story slicing. So my name is Rumesh Wijetunge. I'm from Sri Lanka, but currently I live in Canada, in Toronto. I'm a agile coach by passion as well as by profession. I've been in the industry for more than 17 years, played different roles from being a software developer, graphics designer, to business analyst, to project manager, scrum master, right up to becoming the chief innovation officer of an IT company, a small IT company in Sri Lanka. In addition to that, I've been lecturing and training since 2014 or so. I've even taught doctors and nurses management subjects as well as agile ways of working. So that's something that I've loved to do for the past 9 years. I've been doing training. Not just on Agile, but on business analysis, project management, scaled Agile, management 3.0. I've been doing training on a lot of areas. And I'm the Agile coach at Wiley Global Technology. I'm taking care of agility in the Asia region. That's actually my role. I would like to do a small icebreaker activity as well with y'all. I would like to hear from y'all where y'all are joining from. If y'all can use the chat and just put a message on the chat and let me know where y'all are joining from. Okay, from Cincinnati, Ohio, Wellington, New Zealand, Canada. Okay. Nice to see that. I'm also in Canada, in Toronto, North Carolina, Toronto, Midland. Okay, lots of people from Toronto as well. So really nice to see, and from USA. Great. So we have a diverse audience. I think we have some participants from India as well. So really nice to see. We are going to look at a very interesting topic as well as a very, very important topic in terms of story slicing, user story slicing. Again, you all can get in touch with me. Just scan the QR code, and if you all want, you all can get in touch with me. I'll quickly move on to the session outline. I'll first of all give a small reminder of introduction to user stories. What exactly is a user story? And we'll also remind ourselves about the user story writing format using the user voice format. And then we'll see what do we mean by a quality user story. So investing in quality user stories, let's see what this invest criteria is all about. Why do we need to split user stories? So that's the main topic, splitting user stories. So I'll focus on why do we need to split user stories. Again, if I can request everyone, if you all can be on mute, that would be great. I'm getting a background noise. Yeah, so thank you. So why do we need to split user stories? And then we'll see 3 steps to follow when splitting user stories, and then 10 splitting patterns. I'll be taking you all through the 10 splitting patterns one by one with examples. All right. Let's get into the content. So I'll cover the initial bit in terms of what exactly is a user story, what's this user story user voice format all about, and what's this invest criteria all about. I'll cover these parts very quickly, and we'll get into our main topics in terms of splitting quickly. What exactly is a user story? So like what the name suggests, user story. The user is telling us a story about the functionality that they're expecting from the solution. Right. So it's a brief statement of intent of a functional requirement. Now, this is very important to understand. We write user stories to represent functional requirements of a system, functional requirements of a solution. Being able to add a customer record, being able to delete a customer record, being able to search for a customer, right? Being able to send a notification. These are all functionalities or features of a solution. So we write user stories to represent these functional requirements. And again, it's a statement of intent only. So what it means is the user story is not concrete. It's not set in stone. It's only a statement of intent. And this intent can actually evolve over a period of time, right? It's a brief statement of intent. Again, what it means is we should be able to write the story. We should be able to write this functional requirement as a user story in a very concise, small manner, which can actually fit into a card, maybe a sticky note, maybe a card on Jira or Azure DevOps, whatever tool that we are using. The story should be able to fit into that sort of a card, right? So it's a very brief statement of intent related to some sort of a functionality that users are expecting from the solution. And so when we say functional requirement, we are talking about a need that a particular user has, right? So the user has a problem that needs to be solved, or the user sees an opportunity that can be addressed. And this problem or opportunity or this need will be in a particular context, will be in a particular situation, right? So an administrator being able to add the customer record into the system, the administrator would be in a particular situation. The administrator is facing some problem in a particular environment, in a particular situation. So sorting out that problem in that particular environment is what we are looking at in terms of user stories or these functional requirements, right? So it satisfies a user need within a particular situation. And a user story should deliver value. Once we get this user story done, there should be some sort of a benefit that this user is getting, right? So the user is telling us a story about the functionality that they're expecting. So obviously, by getting this functionality done, they're expecting some sort of benefit in return, a value in return. In other words, there should be some sort of worthiness of doing this user story. There should be some sort of worthiness of doing this user story. We as developers, we are spending money, we are spending time, we are spending effort, we are spending resources to get the functionality done. Similarly, our users or our customers, they are also paying us, right? They are spending money to explain us the functionality, explain to us the functionality, and then they are spending money to get this functionality done. So there should be some sort of a worthiness for them as well, right? So a user story should deliver some sort of a worthiness to the people who are doing it, as well as for the people who are actually expecting it, right? And it says that it's an increment of value. This again is important. When we are writing user stories and when we are getting user stories done as functionality in a system, it might not be the total value, right? It might not be the end-to-end value. It might not be a very big functionality. It might even be a small increment of value, a small functionality that gets done, right? So delivers an increment of value. That's again why we write user stories. And then a user story is very short in nature. One intention is to promote conversation. So a user story acts as a conversation placeholder. Based on the description that we see written on a user story, the people who are involved, the product owners, the business analysts, the team, the agile team can have a conversation based on that. So it acts as a conversation placeholder. A user story acts as a conversation placeholder. Again, I would like to request to be on mute. Otherwise, I'll be getting a background noise. Yeah, thanks. So a user story acts as a conversation placeholder. Finally, a user story provides something called a pidgin language. A pidgin language for business and technical teams to communicate. I will explain what this pidgin language actually means, right? Maybe about 10 years ago, I was working in Dubai. I was working for Emirates Airlines in Dubai. So while over there, myself and my friends, me and my friends from Sri Lanka, we used to get together and used to go on road trips, right? And when we went outside of Dubai, the city, when we went out of the city of Dubai, obviously we had to depend on Google Maps, right? Google Maps worked fine. Maybe for about 20 or 30 kilometers away from the city, it worked fine. But after that, Google Maps also stops working, right? The only option that we had was to, talk to someone that we meet on the road. In these deserted areas, if we meet someone on the road, we should just walk up to that person and ask, okay, we need to get to this particular location. How do we get there, right? But the problem was this: most of the people that we meet would either be, Emiratis, people from Emirates from a very rural area, or maybe people who have, migrated to Emirates, maybe as, some workers and so on. So they're not good in English. They can't talk in English. And the problem is we can't speak their language as well. We can't speak their language. They can't speak our language. But still we need to communicate, right? Now I can remember when going on this trip, I was in the passenger seat. My friend who was driving stopped the vehicle and told me, Rumesh, walk up to this person that we see coming towards us, and just go and ask this person, how do we get to this location? I told my friend, look here, but I don't know how to communicate with this guy. This person talks in their language, but I don't know how to talk to them. What my friend told me was this, Rumesh, you don't need to know their language. Just walk up to this person, point your hand in a particular direction, and ask Sida. Tell the name of the place that we need to go to, Sida, right? If you all know people from India, you all know in Hindi, or I think in people in Emirates, everyone understands this. Sida means straight, right? So you're basically telling the location that you need to go to, pointing your hand in a particular direction and asking Sida, is this the way to go, right? That's exactly what I did. So I walked up to this person and asked Sida, told the name of the place that we wanted to go to and asked Sida. That person went na na na, and he pointed in another direction. So we were able to communicate, right? That's exactly what a user story also provides. It provides a common language for technical people, the development teams, as well as the business people to communicate with one another, right? Business talks business language, right? Technical people, if we are working in a technical team, the software developers, the QA engineers, we talk technical language. We need to find a common ground, and this common ground is actually provided through user stories, right? So user stories provide a pidgin language for business and technical teams to communicate. All right, so this is a user story. A user telling us their need from their perspective within a particular situation as a small narrative or a small story, and it provides us some sort of a direction in terms of what needs to be done to deliver some sort of a value to these stakeholders. That's a user story, right? Let's look at this user voice format now. So this is the most common format for writing user stories. As a user, I must be able to do something so that I can get some sort of a benefit, right? So this is the user voice format. Again, don't get this wrong. This is not the only format that is available to write a user story. This is just one format, right? And this is the most popular format to write user stories, called the user voice format. This is also called the Connextra format, but more popularly, it is known as user voice format. Again, why this is called the user voice format is because if you look at this as a user, so it's like the user is talking, right? The user is given a voice. As a user, I must be able to do this. This is the functionality that I'm expecting. This is the need that I have. It's like the user is talking to us and telling us a story about the functionality that they're expecting. That's why we call it user voice format, right? And a user story covers these three main elements. Who is the user? What do they want? And why do they want it? Right? So three main elements of a user story. Any format that we use, even if we use a simple who, what, why format or any other format for writing user stories, the intention is to cover who is this user, what's the functionality that they want, or what's the need that they have, what's the problem that they want solved, and then why do they want it, what's the benefit that they're expecting, right? Who, what, and why, three main elements. And here's an example. So as an administrator, I must be able to manage customers so that I can maintain customer records to ensure engagement, right? So this is a example that I quickly wrote just for this presentation. As an administrator, so the administrator is the user, administrator is the person who's talking now. I must be able to manage customers. So managing customers, that's the functionality, or that's the what that I'm expecting, so that I can maintain customer records to ensure engagement. That's the why part, that's the benefit, right? what are the different formats for writing user stories? How can we identify this why part? And then how can we make this user story better? These things are completely different topics altogether, which requires a separate section. So separate session. So I will not go there. Just a quick reminder in terms of how to write user stories using the user voice format. Let's move forward. How do we make sure that user stories are of good quality? So we see a person on the screen, William Wake. So William Wake or Will Wake came up with this invest criteria. What he said was, we need to invest on writing good quality user stories. Invest on writing good quality user stories, right? So invest stands for independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable or estimatable, small and testable, right? A good quality user story should be independent. We should be able to get the entire user story done, the entire functionality done without getting stuck in the middle. Now, something like this. Now, let's say we have this manage customers functionality, the user story that we saw on the previous slide, manage customers functionality. Can we get this functionality done end to end? The developers can do the front end development, do the back end development, do the unit testing. The testers can do the testing. The developers can fix the defects, integrate, do the integration testing also. Can we do it end to end without getting stuck in the middle? If that is the case, we can say that this user story is independent. But now if the developers say, okay, I've started writing the code for this particular functionality. In the middle, I'm getting stuck because I need some output from a second story. That means the story is not independent, right? A good user story should be negotiable. The developers should be able to negotiate with the product owner related to the scope of that particular user story. Now, when the product owner adds a story into a backlog, the product owner will mention, okay, these are the things that we need to cover as part of the user story. Now, if the developers feel that, okay, we can't be doing this end to end, this is too much, the scope is too much, we are trying to do a lot of things within this one single user story, the developers should be able to openly have this conversation with the product owner. Hey, Mr. Product Owner, what do you think? There are about 10 acceptance criteria line items over here. Shall we move some of these acceptance criteria items to another user story? Negotiate, right? Not just negotiate on scope. The developers should also be able to negotiate on resources that are needed, any server that is needed, or any framework that needs to be used. The testers, any testing framework that needs used, any testing devices that are needed, anything that needs to be negotiated for the team. If the team needs something, they should be able to negotiate with the product owner. A good user story should be valuable. It should deliver value end to end, right? A user story will deliver value only if all the stages of a software development lifecycle are covered. It's like eating a layered cake, right? Now, let's say we have a layered cake with a chocolate layer on top, then a vanilla layer, then a strawberry layer, again a chocolate layer, right? So let's say when we want to eat this layered cake, we don't want a horizontal slice, right? We would want a vertical slice, simply because we want to taste all the flavors. We want the chocolate flavor, we want the vanilla flavor, we want the strawberry flavor, right? We want the blueberry flavor. We want all the flavors. Then only we'll get the real experience of having a layered cake, right? It's something like that. When we are developing user stories also, the user story should cover the UI, the front-end validation, the service layer, the back-end, the testing, everything should be done. Then only the story would deliver value, right? A good user story should deliver some sort of value to the customers or to the stakeholders. We should be able to estimate the bigness of user stories. Based on the information that are provided on a user story, we should be able to estimate how big is this particular functionality, how big is this particular user story. A good user story should fit into an iteration, should fit into a sprint, right? Now, most of the time when we write user stories and when we start developing the story, we realize this is too big. We can't do this. We can't get this thing end to end done within that particular iteration. That's not good. A good user story should fit into an iteration. It should be small enough to fit into an iteration. And then finally, a good user story should be testable. We should be able to test the functionality. We should be able to verify whether what we have done is correct or not, right? So this is the invest criteria: independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. Focus a little bit more on this criteria called small. A good user story should be small enough to fit into an iteration, right? For now, just keep that in mind. Out of these 6 criteria that we see, focus a little bit more on this small criteria of a user story, right? Now, why do we need to split user stories? The main reason is it's too big. The story is too big to fit into an iteration. The story is too big to complete within a sprint. That's the main criteria for splitting user stories, right? The invest criteria also directly tells us if it is a good user story, we should be able to get it done within the 2-week or 3-week iteration that we select. If it can't be done end to end, right? The UI, the front end validation, the service layer, the back end, the testing, everything should be done within the 2-week time period. If we can't do it and if we can't complete it within that 2-week time period, it's too big, right? That's the main criteria for splitting user stories. Again, the user story is too complex or complicated to implement or test. The story has so many scenarios, the story has so many complexities that it's not possible again to finish it within the 2-week time period. It's not possible to develop it and it's not possible to test it within that limited time period. Again, a criteria for us to split the user story. You don't know enough about the user story and you need to do some research first. That's again a criteria. That's again an indication to us that we need to split the story. Again, I'm sure you guys have, when you all are doing development work, I'm sure you all have come across situations where the story has complexities inbuilt, right? There are unknowns involved. There are uncertainties involved. The only way to figure out these uncertainties is by doing a POC, proof of concept, or by doing some R&D work, research work, right? Now, the research work also takes time, isn't it? The research work also takes time. So, in order to handle that, you can actually split a research part and then the functionality can be implemented later. Another factor, to get rid of something that you can't, that you can do without. To get rid of something that you can do without. Now, when we look at certain user stories, you realize, right, when you look at your acceptance criteria, you realize, this is actually not something big. This is not something valuable. Or this is something that is trivial or something that has been added just to gold plate, right? Product owners also, right, when they talk to business stakeholders, business will tell a lot of things. Product owners also will get excited and put everything in the story. But as we go along, we realize this is something that is actually not needed. We can actually handle it later. If there's something like that, again, we might split it, get rid of all these unwanted parts. Another reason for splitting stories. To create a shared understanding and commitment among all the team members. Now that's required. That's again one of the major factors, right? Agility, as we know, is a team game. Everyone should be in it together, then only agility will become successful, right? And for the team to be committed, for the team to be motivated, for the team to actually come up with a goal for the iteration, having small user stories is again important. It will help create that understanding among everyone, and it will help create that commitment among all the team members. This is why we need to split user stories, right? All right, so let's get into splitting now. We see this guy, Richard Lawrence. If you all haven't, heard about this person, or if you all haven't seen this guy, contributing a lot on LinkedIn, just search for this guy on LinkedIn and follow him. Richard Lawrence. He came up with 3 steps for splitting stories and 10 splitting patterns, right? So I'll show you all the 3 steps that he mentioned and talk about the 10 splitting patterns. This is what he said. First of all, you need to have a starting point. Prepare the input story. prepare a story. First of all, write a story. Now, most of the time, team members or agile teams try to write user stories at the smallest level, right at the get-go, right from the start. They try to write the smallest story possible. It's not possible, right? It might not be possible to write the smallest story right at once. You need to start somewhere, right? That's what Richard Lawrence is also saying. Start somewhere. Write a story, right? Don't think whether it's too big. Don't think whether it's not detailed enough. Don't think about anything. Just write a story. Talk to your stakeholders, understand their need, understand their pain points, and then write it as a user story. Prepare your input story. I'll talk about this a little bit more on the next slide. Next is apply the splitting patterns. So once you have written a story and once you have checked the quality of the story, then apply the splitting patterns, right? Not just one splitting patterns, you might actually need to apply a combination of splitting patterns to get to a good split. And then again, evaluate the split. That's the third step. Start somewhere, write a story, apply the splitting patterns to split your stories. And then once you have split, evaluate the split to see whether you can actually split it further. So these three steps will actually keep on happening. It's a recursive thing, right? It's not like you do step 1, then you do step 2, and then you do step 3 and it's done. Nothing as such, right? So this can be repetitive, this can be recursive. And you can actually be doing this multiple times until you get to a good level of splits. All right, so let's talk a little bit about preparing the input story for splitting, right? First of all, write a story. Like I said, start somewhere, write a story. And the first thing that you need to check is, does this particular big story that you have written satisfy the invest criteria? We talked about invest criteria already, right? Independent, negotiable, valuable. We talked about the 6 invest criteria. Write a story and check whether it's quality. Write a story and check whether it's of good quality. Don't focus on small for now. Focus on the other points, right? Is it independent? Can we get this story done independently? Can we negotiate based on this story? Is this story valuable? Can we estimate this story? Can we test this story? Check that, right? Now, if it satisfies the invest criteria, if it doesn't satisfy the invest criteria, that means the story is not detailed enough. We need to groom the story a little bit more, right? We need to refactor the story so that we make our story a little bit better, first of all. That's the first thing that needs to happen, right? If your story, if the story you have written is not independent, if it doesn't have enough value, right? If it is not testable, that means we need to groom that story a little bit more. We might need to reformulate that particular story, right? All right. Now, if the story satisfies the invest criteria, yes, right? Except for small, all the other criteria are satisfied. Now we need to check whether this story can actually fit into a sprint. Now we are checking whether it's small enough, right? If we have written a good user story, now we are checking whether it's small enough. Does this fit into a sprint? No. Obviously, that's an indication that we need to split it, right? So this is what I said earlier also. The main criteria for us to decide whether to split a story or not is to see whether it's small enough to fit into an iteration, right? If the story is not small enough, that's an indication that it's time to split. Now, another factor to consider is, does this story actually consume most of the team's capacity? Would this story actually take, for example, 8 out of the 10 days in the sprint? One single story takes 8 out of the 10 days to complete during the sprint. Again, that's an indication that it's too big, right? Yes, so it's too big. Better refactor or better split than be sorry later on, right? So again, this is how you prepare an input story, and this is how you decide whether you need to split that particular story or not, right? So prepare your input story and then apply the splitting patterns. Now we are actually moving into the important areas of splitting stories. Let's look at the 10 splitting patterns. Again, these 10 splitting patterns was identified by Richard Lawrence, our friend. Splitting stories based on workflow steps. Splitting stories based on business rules variations. Major effort, minor effort. Splitting stories from simple to complex functionality. Splitting stories based on variations in data. Data entry methods or data boundaries. Differing system qualities. Splitting stories based on CRUD operations or operations. Splitting stories based on use case scenarios, and splitting stories by breaking out spikes, right? So I'll go through these splitting patterns by taking an example. All right. Okay. CRUD operations, I will not be going in the same order as we saw on this particular slide. I'll be building an example. And I'll be taking you all through the splitting patterns one by one while building my example, right? Okay, so we saw this base story, right? As an administrator, I must be able to manage customers so that I can maintain customer records to ensure engagement. This is the story. This is the same story that I showed you all when I showed the user story writing format, the user voice format, right? Okay, let's say this is our starting point. This is our base story. This is the initial input story that we have created. Now we need to apply the splitting patterns. Let's try to apply the CRUD operations or the operation splitting pattern. First of all, let's see what this operations is all about. Whenever we see the word manage or whenever we see the word configure, or when our initial story, right? When our initial story involves some sort of configuration or some sort of management, we can actually look at applying this operations splitting pattern. So we are basically splitting a story based on different operations that can be done by the entity. So the most common operations that can be done are create, read, update, and delete, right? CRUD. Okay, based on CRUD, we can actually split this manage customers functionality into stories like this. As an administrator, I must be able to create a new customer so that I have not completed the entire story, but as an administrator, I must be able to create a new customer record, right? So that's the create. As an administrator, I must be able to edit a customer record. So that's the update. As an administrator, I must be able to delete a customer record. That's the remove or the delete. And then finally, as an administrator, I must be able to view a customer record. So that's our read functionality. Create, read, update, and delete. Okay. So that's the first splitting pattern, splitting user stories based on operations that can be performed. Let's look at another splitting pattern now. Splitting stories based on use case scenarios. Splitting stories based on use case scenarios. Now, let's first of all talk about a use case. We identify use cases to understand a back and forth interaction between a user and a system, right? Now, when we wrote use cases, maybe about 10-15 years ago, when we did waterfall software development, we used to write use cases, right? A use case, when we write the use case scenario, it's a back and forth interaction between a user and a system. User does this, system does this. User does this, system does this, right? So it's a back and forth interaction. So whenever we see something like this, and whenever we see that there's a happy path or happy way of doing it, and then there are alternative ways of getting the same thing done, as well as there can be exceptional scenarios, exception scenarios. We can write separate stories for the happy path. For the alternative paths, we can write a separate story or separate stories. And then even for the exception, we can write separate stories, right? So use case scenario as a splitting pattern is actually useful when the initial story refers to an interaction described by a use case. All right. Let's again see an example. As an administrator, I must be able to create a new customer record. So I'm taking the first split from my previous example. I split the manage customers functionality into add, update, delete, and view. I'm taking the first one, create, or the add functionality, right? As an administrator, I must be able to create a new customer record so that I can do something. Okay. Now, creating a new customer record can be done in different ways, right? Now, the happy path or the happy scenario might be as an again, I would like to request if you all can be on mute, that would be great. Right, thanks. So as an administrator, I must be able to create a new customer record at one at a time, right? I must be, as an administrator, I must be able to create one new customer record at a time so that I can do something. So that, let's say that's the happy path, creating one customer record at a time, happy path, right? Now, alternative might be, rather than just selecting one customer record, I select to add multiple customer records at a time. So that's an alternative. As an administrator, I must be able to create multiple new customer records at a time, right? Alternative one. As an administrator, I must be able to select to add another customer record. So I have added one record. I'm selecting to add another customer record during that flow itself. So that's again an alternative, right? I have submitted and want to create another customer record. That's again another alternative, right? As an administrator, I must be able to roll back customer creation in case of an error. So that's the exception scenario, right? So we can look at happy path, alternative flows, exception flows when doing something, and based on those scenarios, we can split our user stories. Second splitting pattern, splitting user stories using the use case scenarios splitting pattern. Third one, workflow steps. Now, whenever we implement functionality or whenever our customers say something, right? Whenever our users request for a particular functionality from us, there can be cases where there's a workflow involved, right? Now, if we look at a workflows involve a series of steps, right? Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, do this, right? So whenever the functionality that we are trying to implement involves a workflow, right? We can look at the steps in the workflow. And for each step in the workflow, we can write a separate story, right? Split the story based on the steps in a workflow and create multiple stories for each incremental implementation or each incremental step in the workflow. So useful to use when the initial story describes a workflow in a particular process, right? Again,
Hey, Ramesh. Hey.
Yeah.
I have a question. So, some of my stories, is more of a enabler kind of stories, right? Architectural enablers, like that gives you a solution enabler, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of the like needs a lot of discussions with the business. It spans more than 3 weeks. So, for example, I'll give you an example: logical diagram, right? Logical diagram starts with an initial discussion, then but it go for a 4 weeks before they conclude the logical diagram. How do you want to split that? They have to several like maybe 10-20 meetings, and then they come back with a decision point, the final decision that logical diagram is completed. So how do you want to, because the thing is that we don't want stories go beyond 2 weeks, right? Because of the aging of the story, right? Because the average aging should not be more than 7 to 9 days.
Correct.
Usually,
Kumar, let's look at the rest of the splitting patterns also. One of the splitting patterns that I would talk about is breaking out a spike. So
mine is more of spike, actually, spike related, because it's the enablers, right?
Correct. So we'll talk about spikes. It's there as a splitting pattern. As we move forward, we'll talk about that.
Okay. And I need, can you able to share this document after this session?
Yeah. So I've actually shared it with IBC. Someone from there would be sharing it, I think.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So keep that thought. Good question. I'll be showing this, breaking out spikes example, and then I think it will become clear to you.
Yeah. Sorry, I was dragged into something else. I joined just now, so I missed that first part of that. That's okay. Yeah.
So I'm actually going through these splitting patterns one by one. Not in order, not in this order, but I'm showing examples for each and every splitting pattern. That's what I'm doing. Right. So I've covered CRUD operations, splitting stories based on CRUD operations for now. And then I've covered splitting stories based on use case scenarios. That's the second splitting pattern that I covered. I was talking about the third one. So splitting user stories based on workflow steps. So whenever what we implement includes a workflow, where there are steps that are followed, right? Clearly visible steps are there of a particular workflow. For each step in the workflow, we can write a separate story. Again, I'll take this example. As an administrator, I must be able to create one new customer record at a time. As an administrator, I must be able to create one new customer record at a time. I'm taking the previous split that I did, right? And I'm applying these workflow steps. Now, let's say creating this customer record has steps, let's say, right? The first step is to create a basic profile of the customer, some basic details of the customer, like first name, last name, email address, phone number, the home address. Create a basic profile of the customer. So as an administrator, I must be able to add basic details about the customer so that I can do something, right? And the second step in the workflow is I must be able to add contact details about the customer. So you add some basic details and then you add some contact details. Third step, maybe as an administrator, I must be able to add some payment details related to the customer. Let's say that's the third step. Like that, let's say there are multiple other steps also. And the final step is to approve. As an administrator, I must be able to approve a customer record so that I can do something. Steps in the workflow. For each and every step in the workflow, we can write a separate story, right? So that's the third splitting pattern, splitting stories based on workflow steps. And then splitting stories based on business rules variations. Now, first of all, let's try to understand what a business rule is, right? If you take any business, there are certain policies that are applicable, right? In any business, there would be certain policies that are applicable. If I take a simple example, right? Think about HR policies, human resource related policies in a company. Now, leave related policies are there, right? Leave related policies are there. So if a person is taking medical leave, that person can take up to 2 days of medical leave. And if this person is taking more than 2 days of medical leave, there's a business rule saying you need to submit a medical report from the doctor. Up to 2 days of leave you can take without a problem. But if you take more than 2 days of medical leave at a stretch, you need to submit a medical report. That's a rule, right? That's a business rule. Now, based on that rule, the functionality will change, isn't it? Now, if this person is taking less than 2 days of leave, just fill out the form and make the request. Enter the start date and the end date, and you just submit. But if this person is taking more than 2 days of medical leave, now I need to enable another field. Upload a medical report, right? So when we have business rules, and when these business rules involve complex functionality, in order to handle these complex functionalities, we might write separate user stories, right? So useful when the initial story has a variety of business rules to deal with. Here's an example. So as an administrator, I must be able to approve a customer record. Again, I'm taking the last split from my previous story, right? As an administrator, I must be able to approve a customer record. Now, let's say when we go to approve a customer record, let's say we are building a system related to insurance, let's say, right? We are building a solution related to insurance, and it's all about, insurance package, registering a customer for an insurance package, that sort of a thing, right? So credit limit becomes applicable. Now, let's say approving the customer is based on credit score, right? Approving a customer record is based on credit score, let's say. So as an administrator, I must be able to automatically approve a customer record if the credit score is over the eligible amount. If the score is over the eligible amount, it's an automatic approval of the customer record. As an administrator, I must be able to separately handle a customer record if the credit score is below the minimum eligible amount. So if it is less than that, we need to handle it in a different way. The functionality differs if the credit score is less than the minimum amount. You handle it as a separate user story, right? So based on business rule variations, the functionality might change. and you might actually want to handle it as separate user stories. That's again another splitting pattern. Let's look at another splitting pattern. Splitting stories based on simple and complex functionality. Now, when we have certain user stories, when we write certain user stories, there can be instances where within the story, within the acceptance criteria, there's a lot of complex functionality involved, right? The complexity is actually hidden. The complexity is actually hidden as acceptance criteria within the user story itself, right? Now, when we have situations like this, we can actually dig a little bit deep into the user story that we have written, dig a little bit deep into the acceptance criteria that we have written. If we see some complex functionality hidden inside the acceptance criteria, we can actually write separate user stories for the complex functionality, right? So this sort of a splitting pattern is actually useful when the functionality moves from simple to complex functionality. Keep the core as simple functionality, keep the core as a simple user story, and then for each variation, write a separate new story. Here's an example. As an administrator, I must be able to view all customer records. So we wrote the view functionality when we wrote the CRUD operations, right? As an administrator, I must be able to view customer records. Now, within the view, right? Within the view, this, if you take, it's a simple select all functionality, right? It's a simple select all query. We are not looking at any, filters or anything like that. We are just putting a select all functionality, right? But within this functionality, within this view functionality, we will see that there are lots of complexities involved. We only need to show the top 10 records, first of all. And then for the rest of it, we need to show pagination. And then when showing the view, we should be able to view by certain criteria, maybe by region, right? So whenever we have functionality hidden inside a story, and within this one single story, when there are hidden functionalities involved, hidden complexities involved, for each of these hidden complexities, we can write separate user stories. As an administrator, I must be able to view only the top 10 customer records. As an administrator, I must be able to traverse to view more customer records, not just the top 10. We want to view the next 10 customer records also. So I want to traverse. As an administrator, I must be able to view a group of customers grouped by the region. Again, grouping. So complexities, for each and every complexity, we can actually write separate user stories. That's again another splitting pattern. I'll move forward. Major effort, minor effort. So when we have certain functionality to implement, we sometimes come across this sort of a situation. If we get part of the functionality done, 80% is done. I'm sure you all have actually come across this when you talk to your developers also. The developers will end up saying, Rumesh, if we get up to this point done, 80% of the story is done. The rest is just 20%. Even though we have multiple scenarios, this 20% can be done very quickly, right? Up to this, it's major effort, and the rest of it becomes easy once we get this major effort out of the way.
Rumesh, a quick question. So these things, the product owner and everyone has to discuss.
Sorry,
right?
Can you ask a question later? You disturb the class. I mean, everyone just waiting for your answer. Can you just hold your question until the end?
Yeah, sure, definitely. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, let's answer the questions later. Yeah. I was talking about splitting stories based on major effort and minor effort, right? So there can be instances where, like I said, lots of effort is needed to get something done up to a certain level, and once we get that out of the way, the rest of it becomes easy, right? For that sort of a particular scenario, we can split using this major effort, minor effort splitting pattern, right? Here's an example. As an administrator, I must be able to enable credit card payments for customers to settle premium payments, right? So again, I'm talking about this insurance example. Maintaining when we get an insurance package, we need to make sure that we make the premium payment, right? Now, we are trying to enable a functionality so that the customer can actually settle this premium amount using their credit card. Okay. So enabling the credit card payments, that's the functionality that we want to enable. But when we talk to our developers, the developers might end up saying, so credit card can be of different type. Visa card, MasterCard, Amex card, Diners Club, like this, there can be different types of credit card payments. And when we talk to the developers might end up saying, if we get the Visa card functionality implemented, that's about 80% of the functionality done. By the time we get the Visa card functionality done, the payment related infrastructure is already done. Right? We can handle the payment related infrastructure when we get the Visa card functionality done. And when it is done, the rest of it becomes easy. Right? So as an administrator, I must be able to enable Visa card payment. That's the major effort. And once we get it done, Amex card, MasterCard, Diners Club becomes easy, but we handle them as separate user stories. Mine effort, right? So major effort, mine effort, that's again a splitting pattern. Variations in data. So I'll move forward to the next splitting pattern. Variations in data. So when we have situations, maybe I'll explain this using an example. I'm sure you all have come across situations where based on a value that you select from a drop down, right? Based on a value that you select from a drop down, based on that value, the fields differ, right? If you select the first option from the drop down, you get 3 fields. If you select the second option from the drop down, you end up getting 5 fields, something like that, right? So there are instances like that where the functionality changes based on a selection. Can be a drop down, can be radio buttons, can be checkboxes, anything. Right? The functionality changes based on a selection that you make. So when you have a situation like this where the story actually does different things based on the selection of data. The story that we have written, the initial story that we have written, does different things based on the value that you select from the drop down, from that particular entity. To handle each of these scenarios, you can write separate user stories. All right. Now look at this example. So as an administrator, I must be able to set the premium calculation parameters based on customer ailments. Right. So we are talking about insurance packages, but people who are getting insurance packages might come with some baggage, right? They might actually have some sicknesses, some ailments. Now, based on the ailment, the parameters that gets enabled should differ. Let's say, okay. So as an administrator, I must be able to capture ailment related details about customers when the customer is a diabetic, right? If it is a diabetic, show separate fields. If it is a heart patient, show some different fields. If it is a cancer patient, so show some different fields. The premium amount, the premium calculation differs based on whether it's a diabetic patient, heart patient, or a cancer patient. To handle this, rather than handling it in one single story, all these scenarios in one single story, for each of those scenarios, write separate user stories, right? So that's the next splitting pattern, variations in data. Splitting stories based on data boundaries or data entry methods. There are instances where the functionality is actually hidden in the UI, or the complexity is actually in the UI. I'm sure again you all have come across situations where the functionality is straightforward. The functionality can be done easily, but there are some complexities involved simply because of the UI, right? The UI needs to be changed or modified for different situations. So when we have situations where the same functionality can be done in different ways using the UI, to handle each of those, you might write separate user stories, right? So useful when the complexity is actually in the UI rather than in the functionality. Again, here's a simple example. As an administrator, I must be able to capture the birthday related information of a customer. Very hypothetical, very simple example. As an administrator, I must be able to capture birthday related information of a customer. Now, let's say the birthday can be captured maybe using a text field, right? So we put a text field and say, okay, the birthday can be entered as a text field, or maybe as a combination of drop downs. For the day also a drop down, for the month also a drop down. So that's again another combination. Or we might capture the birthday using a calendar widget. That's again another way of capturing the date, right? So the complexity is actually in the UI. I took a very simple example over here, but there are instances where we implement functionality, but the complexity is actually hidden in the UI. When we have situations like that, we can write separate user stories for each of these UI related aspects. And the last splitting pattern, sorry, not the last one, splitting stories based on differing system qualities. Splitting stories to differ system qualities. Now, there can be instances where we need to split user stories based on some sort of improvement that we need to do, right? Sorry, the heading over here somehow has gone wrong. Let me just check. Yeah, so let me just change the heading. Give me 1 second. So the heading is this, breaking out a spike actually, right? Splitting user stories based on breaking out a spike. So there can be instances where the functionality that we are implementing is very, very complex. Like what was the question that was asked earlier also. There's a lot of research work to be done. Things are unknown, things are not clear. And we can only clarify these requirements through multiple discussion sessions, multiple brainstorming sessions. There's a lot of exploration work to be done, right? We need to do multiple rounds of research, right? When we have situations like this, where we figure things out along the way, for each of these explorations that we do, we call them enablers, right? So it can be an exploration enabler, it can be an infrastructure enabler, it can be an architecture related enabler. Any type of enabler where the developers actually are spending a lot of time to do this exploration work. For each of these exploration pieces, we can write a separate story, right? So split a story to allow some time for the research work and investigation work before we implement the functionality, right? So there are too many uncertainties involved. There are too many unknowns involved. When we have situations like this, we can actually split. We can write separate stories to handle each of these, right? Now, here's an example. As an administrator, I must be able to view statistics regarding customer records as a histogram. Now, let's say we are developing functionality using some sort of a Java technology and some Java framework is used, right? Let's say everyone is new. Everyone in the team is new to this particular Java technology, right? Java framework. And using this Java framework, let's say we need to create a histogram. No one has done this before. Creating a histogram, no one has done it before, right? Now, when we have a situation like this, the first thing that we need to do is we need to understand what this histogram is all about. How do we actually create a histogram? So there will be a lot of investigation work that needs to be done just to get this histogram out of the way, right? As a developer, I must be able to investigate on how to create a histogram so that I can do something, right? So we are actually writing a story to handle the investigation work on how to create a histogram, right? The next thing is we need to investigate on how to load the data to the histogram. So that's the next research work to be done. First of all, how to draw a histogram, then how to load data into this histogram. Then only we can actually load with real customer data and get the real histogram out of the way. Maybe after this, we might need to do some more research work, right? Once we have drawn the histogram, we need to look at how to filter this histogram, right? How to now add some filtering criteria to this histogram. And then once we select a value from the histogram, how to go to a detailed page. We might need to write another story for that. So continuous exploration might result in multiple stories. For each of those stories, you might, for each of those research pieces, you might actually want to write separate stories. Not just for exploring something that is unknown in terms of functionality, even for infrastructure work, right? Spinning up a server on AWS, we might not be able to do it all at once, right? It might need to do some exploration. It might need some sort of multiple configuration steps to be followed. So for each of those, we can write separate user stories. Okay, with that, we've actually come to the end of the splitting patterns. So it's actually time for you all to go and slice some user stories. You all would have seen we can use a combination of splitting patterns to come to arrive at a good split. It's not a one-time thing. We will need to keep on applying splitting patterns. Then only we will actually be able to get to a good level of a split in terms of user stories. And I think we can open the floor for any questions now. Let me just go to the next slide also. Again, like I said, you all can get in touch with me. Just scan this QR code and you all can get in touch with me in terms of LinkedIn or my email address is also there. I'm open for questions from anyone.
Rumesh, one quick question.
Yeah.
So sometimes the product owner or the SMEs are like new, and after their training, they get into the agile. So any thoughts or suggestion which story splitting patterns to use while splitting out your stories?
See,
For the
there's
new
no
people.
Yeah, so there's no best way of doing it, right? And like I said earlier, also it's a combination. It's a combination of splitting patterns, right? Again, there's this concept called breadth before depth. Breadth before depth, right? So first of all, go horizontally.
Okay.
Right? The easiest way to go horizontally in terms of splitting is to use something like CRUD operations or workflow steps. You're going horizontally, right? Create, read, update, delete. So you're going horizontally. And then something like step 1 in the workflow, step 2 in the workflow, step 3 in the workflow. Again, you're going horizontally. So first of all, do the horizontal split and then do a vertical split. Go vertical. Now, once you, like I did earlier also, right? So you have the manage customers functionality, you split it into create, read, update, delete. Then you focus on create. Okay, now you see how can I split, create further using vertical splits. You're going down vertically now. That's something that you can follow, but the only direction that I can give Amol is there's no one single way of doing it, and you can't just use one splitting pattern and say that okay, I have got the optimal split. No.
Okay.
You need to use a combination of splits one after another. Then only you will get to a good level of splitting.
Sure. Thanks, Rumesh. Thanks for your suggestion. I think this content is very good. And the way you shared it will increase a lot of our knowledge. So really thank you.
Thanks.
Ramesh, I have a very quick question. So again, the splitting the stories, right? All these techniques we can use as a team, but the product owner should know the various functionalities, right? So this particular technique is applied to everyone, right? So everyone should work and towards that the stories. Okay.
Correct. And in terms of answering that question a little bit more, Kumar, right? If we take a scaled environment, a scaled agile environment, it's not just one team, right? If you're familiar with scaled agile, and if I take SAFe, I'll take the scaled agile framework or SAFe as an example, right? In SAFe, it's not just the team events that we do. It's not just the team ceremonies that we do. We have program level ceremonies also. PI planning is there, right? Now, during PI planning, the teams will start splitting, isn't it? The teams will start looking at the features. They'll start looking at the stories. The product owner is also there. The team and the product owner will get together and start splitting the stories, right? And a point that I wanted to add was, it's not just the product owner who needs to know how to split stories. The team needs to know, right? Because the technical aspects need to come from the team, and based on that, the product owner might understand. Okay, what these guys are saying is correct. They need to do some research work. Let's split it using breaking out a spike. So it's a team game. It's a collaborative thing that needs to happen when splitting.
Correct. Thanks, Ramesh.
Will we be receiving the recording of this training?
Maybe someone from IBC, if they're there, they can answer. I'm not quite sure.
But Ramesh, the presentation is very good. But as I said, can you save the slides? So
I think it will be done. I think it will be done by IBC. I'm sure the recording also will be shared, as well as And then the slides also will be shared. I've shared the slides with them. It should come. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Rumesh.
Hey.
Thanks. First of all, thanks to you sharing this gold to us.
Yeah.
And I have a quick question. So when do we do this story splitting exercise? Is it a product backlog refinement for our team level? I'm not going on a program level.
Yeah. So the splitting of user stories can actually happen even before you come into the grooming session, right?
Okay.
Backlog grooming, refinement of the backlog happens ongoing, right?
Right.
The ceremony is just a ceremony. Yes, during the ceremony, we can split further. And even after that, right, when you go into the sprint planning, you can still refine, right? You can still split.
Okay, it's an ongoing process.
Correct. And if you actually look at it, your sprint backlog gets confirmed, or you are actually making a hard commit only when you start the sprint. The team is making a hard commit only when they start the sprint, right? Until that time, your stories can get groomed.
Right. Is there any chances, like, so suppose we started working on a story and later we find out, okay, we did not split it very well. So is there any scope we can do it later as well when we in the middle of story, sprint?
You can, right? You can. The only thing that so to answer your question, in the middle of the sprint, you can still split a story, right?
Yeah.
But the only thing that you need to worry about, and the product owner needs to, properly manage this, is not to inject any new scope.
Okay, got it.
You can still split the big story into small ones, but if you are injecting more functionality, that means you are, blowing it up, right? And you might not be able to handle it within the sprint. Then the team and the product owner must discuss and say, look here, guys, we are including more functionality here. Let's move this part to a next sprint. That conversation should happen.
Sure. Thanks, Rumesh.
Yeah.
Hi, Rumesh. This is Pete Jackson.
Yeah.
So
Hi, Kate.
if you have a story that has a large acceptance criteria, and one of the things that we've done, so we split the story based on the acceptance criteria and worked the AC that could be worked, and then left the remaining AC to be put in the backlog. Is that a correct flow, or should that be opposite?
So when you look at the acceptance criteria and when you split it based on acceptance criteria, it's actually something like this. So there are certain functionality that is actually hidden inside the acceptance criteria, and you're splitting it. It's something like this simple complex splitting pattern that you're using. It's correct. It's a splitting pattern. It's a way of splitting, but it's not the only way. It's just 1 out of the 10.
Okay, because they were suggesting that we do it the opposite, but I thought it would be better to split based on what we could do and then leave the remaining acceptance criteria that we couldn't do to put that in the backlog. But they mentioned that we should do it in the reverse order, and I thought that was kind of backwards. So okay.
Yeah. No. So you can look at the acceptance criteria and then see, okay, can we do this set of acceptance criteria as part of this user story? Does it logically make sense to do this set of acceptance criteria as part of this user story? And then a next set of acceptance criteria and so on.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, any other thoughts or questions from anyone?
Hi, this is Ravi.
Yeah, Ravi.
Thanks, Rumesh, again for the good session. So I have a current project where we have the scenario that the functional user stories that are provided by the product owners, they further have scope for developers to split them into their individual stories. Right? Because a functional story or a functional scenario, what is described in the story, has further scope that the developers have to implement it in 3 to 4 more further stories. So a story is further breaking down into a story in the context of a developer's work involved. So how do we track that? Does this become a developer task rather than a story, or is this still qualified as a story?
Can you give me an example? See, it's like this, Ravi.
Yeah.
Now, if the developers are doing some exploration work, it can be written as an enabler story, right? So like I showed earlier, breaking out a spike as a developer, I should be able to research on histograms. I should be able to, do the loading of data for the histogram. So that's developer work, right? So for that, if you can write a story, but if you are, if you are splitting stories like this, as a UI engineer, I should be able to create the UI. As a front-end developer, I should be able to do the front-end validation for the UI. That's not a right way of splitting stories. See, if you write a story saying as a UI engineer, I should be able to create the UI, it doesn't deliver end-to-end value, right? It violates this value criteria of invest, isn't it? What I told in terms of value is you need to be able to eat the entire layered cake, right? Your front-end validation, back-end service layer, everything should be done. Then only the value is delivered. So if you write a story saying as a UI engineer, I should be able to create the UI, it doesn't deliver end-to-end value.
Agreed. No, so we took this approach of having epic and a story concept, where in the epic layer, we have defined the objective of what the function should deliver. Right.
Okay.
And this basically is a technology transformation project where there are multiple systems involved as well. Where from, like, just as an example, a business user says, I want my loyalty functionality that works in today's system to be also supported in the new system. Right. That's the objective of the epic. And now when we go down further into a story, we split that objective into multiple stories driven by the systems that needs to make the changes. Like, for example, there are 5 systems that needs to support to have the changes implemented for that epic objective, right? And then further into that, sorry, go ahead.
No, Ravi. So I think y'all again remember what I said right at the start, right? We write user stories to represent a user's need, right? We write user stories from a user's perspective, not from the system's perspective. I feel that you guys have gone down a path where you are writing stories for system functionality. Am I right to think like that?
Yeah, sort of. Now when I think about it, yes, the more stories where pertain to as a system, I should be able to do it, right? So that's the path that the project team have gone down to, because it's a new cloud product that's being stood up, and when the developers started working to piece their work together, they started writing the stories to build that product.
Yeah. Okay.
But at some point we are struggling to roll them up into a business functionality, because the developers have gone down the path of splitting their work into building the product, right? So
they've gone down a wrong.
That's where we are.
They've gone down a wrong path, but ideally this is what should happen, right? Even if you get a system functionality done, finally someone is getting benefit, right?
Yeah.
That their thought process actually needs to change. That's what has happened.
Yeah, I think they need to define the feature first and then the user stories, right?
Think about the user first. Think about the user first and the benefit that the user is getting. That's how we need to start. I think in your case, Ravi, I think you all have started thinking about the system, the product first, rather than the user. That's what has happened.
Yeah, just a quick example. In my case, what we're doing is initiative, features, and user stories and tasks. So,
yeah. Okay. Maybe get your team members to change their mindset. Get them to think of the users and the problem that the users are facing.
Yeah, it's the back office product. That's another caveat to add. It's not a user system who uses their system. So it's a back office system for a front end POS. So the user does not interact with that back office system. So so in that case, the back office provides all the necessary information what a front say a POS team would look at. So that's where the complexity comes into play.
Okay, Ravi, in that case, right, most of these might actually be enablers. See, you're actually setting up the infrastructure. You're actually setting up a platform which can be consumed by a front-end POS system, right? POS system.
Yeah.
So you're actually writing enabler stories. Maybe y'all might want to think about going down the path of, as a developer, I must be able to do it. As a developer, I must be able to do that. So think about that.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. And then we can link those enablers to a feature or a business objective. So that way we can roll those enablers into a business functionality ultimately that will accomplish what end user would want to see.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, Ramesh.
Yeah. Any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, so
Okay.
sometimes Ramesh, practical things, right? Sometimes anti-pattern and the team doesn't like to split the stories because it's additional work, right? Additional documentation work and things like that. But that's a kind of awareness, right?
Yeah.
How do you handle that? So if the team says like, why they want to get that, they split the stories as creating the additional work for them, admin work for them. So sometimes they feel like that. How do you handle that?
You actually need to let them feel the pain, Kumar. That's the best way to do it, right? Okay, without splitting, you are trying to handle everything all at once. You go and feel the pain, right? At the end of it, at the end of the sprint, were you able to finish it? You spent a lot of time. You don't have anything to show, right? And you don't look good in the eyes of your stakeholders. Let them feel that.
Right.
Then if you are the Scrum Master, you can ask them, right? Do you want to go down this path, or shall we look at improving this? Yeah. Then they'll agree.
Yeah. So because some of my projects, they're running with the Kanban. It's not the Scrum. It's not a 2 weeks sprint, but it's a Kanban. So that, but again, they need to look at that aspect. So.
Correct. Yeah.
Hey Ramesh, I have one quick question again. So during splitting the stories, so everyone from the Scrum team involves that meeting, or like only SMEs goes to that meeting, like when we are doing the splitting of the user story?
No, so if you are doing your splitting during your backlog grooming or your sprint planning, it's a team event, right? Your backlog grooming ceremony is a team event. Your sprint planning is a team event. So the entire team is there. Now, when you do grooming, sometimes the product owner might invite subject matter experts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, we are doing these things during product log, like refinement, or either sprint planning. There's no separate, event we are hosting for this.
At team level, no. But like I said, at program level,
program level, we do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ramesh, about when you split the stories, then of course the story points needs to be divided, right? Story points has to, of course, it has to be shared.
Revisited. Correct. You need to revisit. I won't use the word shared, Kumar. Again, story point estimation is it's a combination of things, right? Not just effort. It's a combination of risk involved, dependencies involved, what else? Complexities involved. It's multiple factors, right? So you can't distribute the story points. You might need to re-estimate.
Revisit. Okay. Yeah. And it's of course it's standard guidelines, right? So story points with the hours estimation. So
Okay.
Thanks, Ramesh.
Yeah, I mean, if you all have any questions, any further questions, just get in touch with me. Do follow me on LinkedIn also. Be glad to help. I've actually written an article on LinkedIn also on this same topic. If you all start following me, just check the articles that I've written. You should be able to see these same set of examples written as an entire article. Yeah.
Great. I already sent it a guest.
Okay. Yeah. I'll check after the call. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I know that is okay. We are over the time. Also, it's specific to user stories. But do you have experience in the solution PI as well, right? So, some of my questions relate to solution PI sessions, but that we can talk that in offline. So yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much, everyone.